Thanks everyone for joining. We'll start in a few minutes. Thanks everyone for coming. Start in a few minutes. And grab some water or some tea as we get ready to get started. All right, everyone, it is time for us to get started. So welcome and thank you so much for joining us on this 2023 webinar, The Role of Artist Labor, Artists Can't Eat Prestige. I'm Sherilyn Seeley and I'm the Senior Program Manager for Grantmakers and Yards. So before we begin our webinar, I want us to just take a moment to review our Zoom features so that you have the optimal experience with us today. So if you have a question for our tech team during the webinar, you can feel free to use the chat function and message one of the LGC techs. You can also look in our chat right now, and you can reach out to Jess if you have any questions. LGC Tech Ali is also here if you have any questions. Otherwise, if you have questions for our presenters specifically, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, okay? So chat, tech issues, questions for presenters, Q&A feature. All right. And if you'd like your experience to include live captioning, you can select the closed caption or CC feature at the bottom of your screen. It's in the toolbar and you can select show subtitles and that should get you going. All right. So as creators, drivers, and shapers of popular culture, artists take on many roles. However, when the day is over, the artist must stop working, like so many of us, and switch roles to become a parent, picking up their child from school, or hopeful student applying to graduate school, or even the individual sitting next to you at the doctor's office. Artist labor comes in the form of gig work and contract work, which unfortunately does not ensure financial stability, healthcare benefits, or security to plan for the future. But as funders and political advocates seek out new opportunities to advocate for social protection of artists as laborers in the workforce, what can funders do? So today we are glad to have joining us Rafael Espinal, Executive Director at Freelancers Union, Dr. Angie Kim, President and CEO of the Center for Cultural Innovation, Jessica Mele, former Program Officer for the Performing Arts at William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and Dr. Rychetta Watkins, Director of Grantmaking and Partnerships at Memphis Music Initiative. So we're glad to have all of them joining us today. And I'm going to kick it over to Jess to get us started.
Thank you so much, Sherilyn. By the way, I just want to shout out to the inspiration for the title of this webinar comes from the union that I worked for 100 years ago called the Harvard Union of Clerical and Technical Workers. And when Harvard said that they should be lucky to work at such a prestigious university, they said, we cannot eat prestige. And there is a book on the same name chronicling the union's story, and I highly recommend it. So I'm coming to you from, I'm Jessica Mele. I am coming to you from unceded Ohlone Ramaytush land. I am a middle-aged white woman with short hair and red glasses. I'm wearing a striped shirt and a rusty blazer. And I, until August 3rd, was a program officer in the Performing Arts program at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. And I'm here to talk to you about some of the work that we did there. Some of you know that Hewlett staff are on 8-year terms. So my term came to an end. And I'll get a little bit more into that because I am experiencing a lot of the things that were written about in this paper. So we commissioned this paper, I think in 2020 and published it in 2021. Time seems to move differently these days, but some context about this paper. So it is a snapshot of the field just before and during a time of crisis in 2020 and 2021. And that's really was ended up really benefiting the paper, even though it was a tumultuous time and we are still not finished with the tumult. So we provided a grant to the Center for Cultural Innovation, and they commissioned Urban Institute to write this paper. The inspiration actually started with the passage of AB 5 in California in 2019. And at the time, there was a lot of fear in the arts community in California about what this would mean, particularly for small organizations that had been misclassifying workers for a very long time as independent contractors when they should have been W-2 employees. And in fact, AB 5 dealt with misclassification by really codifying what made a person an employee versus an independent contractor. It was supported by many labor unions in the state, including many arts labor unions. Actors Equity was a big advocate for this bill. Also known as the gig worker law, it was originally targeted at Uber and Lyft and other gig-based entities that were engaging with workers as independent contractors and not as W-2 employees. We felt that there was something missing in that conversation, that there was a need to explore the working conditions and needs for independent arts workers who were genuinely not misclassified. And I'll get to that in a minute. Also in 2020, federal supports, the pandemic happened. And federal supports during the pandemic provided the single greatest reform in the social safety net since Obamacare in the form of the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program for independent contractors. So that was a really big, very unprecedented moment, and a great jumping off point for us to launch into this paper and its inquiry. So the paper intentionally focused on those workers who were not misclassified. It focused on California because that's where Hewlett's home is. So genuinely independent contractors under the law and the supports that they needed. And it asked a few questions. Who is the artist workforce in California? What if we built a system of social supports around their needs? What would that look like? And also who else might benefit? So I will get to that in a little bit. What do we mean by artists as workers? So this was a complicated question. In the process of writing the paper, Urban Institute and CCI very wisely developed a glossary because there were so many terms running around that we really needed to put some definition around those. So the paper defines arts workers as including artists and others who work in the arts, cultural, and entertainment industries. It's a pretty broad tent. And we found in the interviews associated with the paper that many artists don't see themselves as workers, but rather as creatives outside of the typical employment structures. So just having this definition seemed to be new territory in the way that we talked about artists in the field at the time. So here's some of what the data says. I encourage you to read the full paper, but the Cliff's Notes version, if anyone remembers what Cliff's Notes are, Cliff's Notes version was artists in California are more likely to be self-employed and have higher levels of educational attainment than the broader workforce. They're less likely to have full-time employment. And self-employed arts workers in California actually earn less than other self-employed workers in the state. And they also earn less than arts workers with W-2 employment. They're also, as a workforce, less racially and ethnically diverse than the overall workforce. And there's a big caveat to that, which has to do with who is visible in the data. So it's really difficult to see who is an artist given the broadly available data sets. The visible arts workers are those who report their earnings and also those who make enough money from their art form to report it for tax purposes. So we suspect that this data challenge leads to a chronic underreporting of BIPOC, low income, undocumented, and disabled artists who are nevertheless working in their field. So that's the big caveat and a real hole in the data that is available. What are the unique needs and challenges that artists are facing as it relates to employment? So a number of those unique needs and challenges have to do with the structure of artistic work. As Sherilyn pointed out, artistic work is economic insecurity prone because it is time limited, because it is project based. It is often volatile. It leads to this kind of feast or famine situation. There are also ownership rights challenges, whether someone is a W-2 employee and whatever they produce is owned by the entity that employs them, or a 1099 worker. And often artists can be both of these things at the same time. They can also be an employer at the same time. So there are lots of different relationships that artists are navigating. And then there are lots of different types of entities that artists are navigating, often simultaneously. 501c3s, fiscally sponsored projects, they could operate as a sole proprietor, or they could incorporate it as an LLC or a public benefit entity, or all of these at the same time. In addition, something that seems to be somewhat unique to arts workers is that the barriers to entry to this field are really high, often requiring a master's and bachelor's degree without the guarantee of high income over time, as you would see in other professions with that high barrier to entry, like law or medicine. So I'm going to give you my example in the interest of like vulnerability. I ended my term at Hewlett, and I am launching a solo performance that actually premieres starting Thursday. It's called Eat the Mama. It's a solo show that I wrote about my reluctant journey into motherhood. For this project, I created a fiscally sponsored project via Fractured Atlas. And I am, and thank you, everyone, very nice. I'm engaging independent contractors for this project. And I will be sending out 1099s in January. This is a relationship that is really new to me. Yes, at Z Space in San Francisco. Thank you. In addition, I have a consulting practice now. So that makes me a sole proprietor. And that is a new territory that I'm exploring simultaneously with this fiscally sponsored project. And then if you look at my taxes for this year, I will have 8 months of the year as a W-2 employee of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So I am just right now living many of the policies and policy holes that we explored in the paper that were at that point kind of theoretical to me. Now they're not so much theoretical. Thank you, Eddie, for putting the San Francisco Chronicle date book in there. And thank you for encouraging me to self-promote, because that's a new thing for me as well. Anyway, I think those relationships are probably familiar to many of you, to many of your grantees, that artists are negotiating these different entities, these different relationships constantly. And that's pretty unique to artistic work. So here are some potential safety net opportunities that came up in the paper. Places to explore how we could better support independent workers through policies. So they fall into, I think, two categories: the category of benefits, universal basic income, portable retirement benefits. Angie's going to talk about some of these. I would add paid leave, parental leave, disability insurance, unemployment insurance. And then there's also a whole host of rights that are afforded to W-2 workers that make their work safer, and that independent contractors do not have the benefit of: health and safety protections, wage and hour protections, anti-discrimination harassment protections, the right to bargain collectively, recourse for unpaid wages and contract fees. So these are also rights that it seems we could work toward supporting independent workers in gaining in the way that W-2 employees have access to these rights under law. So here's a very brief summary of the recommendations in the paper, and I do encourage you to read the full paper, but misclassification is still an issue. It still needs to be addressed. We do think that is important, even though that wasn't the focus of this paper. The recommendation to extend social insurance and worker protections to freelancers, as on the previous slide. Expand and scale collective efforts like organizing worker collectives or cooperative structures. And there's some policy making that pertains to making it easier to create cooperatives in California, for example. And then for all of the above, expand cross-sector organizing with groups that might have common cause with arts workers. And that is a long list. Angie knows it much better than I, so I am happy to hand it over to her, but it includes folks like home healthcare workers, domestic workers, massage therapists, hairstylists, tattoo artists, folks whose work is often defined by this independent contractor relationship, and they are not misclassified. That is the nature of the work. Okay, and I will just say we really need more funders in this space to engage with these questions and to explore policies that can support this aspect of our field. So I'm going to hand it off now. I believe that's my last slide, handing it off to Angie Kim.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Angie Kim. I'm the president and CEO of the Center for Cultural Innovation. And I was super happy to work with Jess on the Arts Workers in California report. CCI, for those of you who don't know, we've been around for quite a while now, since 2001. Since its first day, it has been focused on artists and not institutions. And then when I took over as the president CEO, I expanded it to all people, all individuals in the arts field, which basically meant suddenly we were really looking at people's socioeconomic systems and their labor issues. And CCI very causally, directly as a result of that AB5 during COVID research report, we decided, or I decided, but we are collectively working on basically starting up a new permanent line of work to do research, advocacy, coalition building, and direct investments in building the new systems of support that have yet to exist, that would provide the kind of protections that protect those who have fallen through the cracks of traditional employer conferred benefits and protections, which, in other words, artists. That work, some of you may have heard of it or have followed it. We started out a couple years ago calling that new line of work Russell Lab. And even though they are a supporter, it's not named after Ted Russell, but spiritually, it definitely channels him. That is a joke. It's not literally named after him. We also, right now, if you go to the CCI website, you could find out about that line of work under the Soul Center for Liberating Work, but we are going to do a name change to reflect the world building that we want to do. And the new name of this new line of work, sorry to make it so confusing, you all, but we are human and we are iterating, is the new name will be called Unfettered. The report, there's a couple things that just pointed out that I also want to just really highlight is, of course, it is in California. The research was based in California for California artists, but it is a microcosm. And what I found really sort of surprising was that artists are 3 times more likely to be self-employed, and that 35% of all of California's artists are working gig to gig. And sometimes that's contract labor. There's a whole bunch of competing definitions of what is this phenomenon. There is no easy definition to talk about people who are not full-time employed getting benefits and protections. It's gig workers, freelancers, under the table, survival economics, all of those kinds of folks, and artists fit in all of those categories. What we as an institution, just to model this for all of you who are thinking about getting into the socioeconomic issues of artists, we went on a journey and tried to find ourselves and our tribe when it came to who are we going to align with when it comes to protecting and supporting artists. And what we found is that because of that research report, what we found is that our sector of artists do not fit easily into the misclassification debate that Jessica mentioned. So just to give you an example, the AB5 law, which is all about the misclassification as a strategy to getting more people protected, that AB5 law would have, for instance, when it was enacted, required recording studios that are trying to cut an album to potentially put all the artists that they were going to work with and give them like, single contracts, potentially make them an employer of all of these musicians. Restaurants that have like every Wednesday night, there is a band that they'll pay a gig amount to. Suddenly now that restaurant, because it provides steady income, potentially has to make those artists, those musicians who come in maybe once a year, once every Wednesday, suddenly those are employees. So there's a lot of examples that we started hearing about, and it made us really realize like, okay, CCI is not in a position to say, yes, we agree that this is the misclassification debate in order to win on expanding protections to arts workers, because it just was too, frankly, messy for us. And there are a lot of other industries that it's not an easy solution to just look at everything through the lens of like, should they be employed or should they not be employed? Or how should they be employed full time? And the fact of the matter is, the world has been changing. Employers just don't want to be employers who are on the hook writ large. So even if people are getting employed full time, they are not getting the kind of pensions that were the case a generation ago. Everyone has just so much more precarity. The unique moment that we're in right now, for all of those of you who are interested in getting involved in social protections, is that there is probably, in my professional lifetime, no greater moment when people, the public, general public, is aware of two things. One is because of COVID, systems are broken, and that it's not just a matter of a simple fix. The other thing that people have awakened to is that they want to support labor. I was just at a few days ago, Local Progress. It's a conference of locally elected officials, and the amount of pro-union activity in everyone's backyards across the country is at an all-time high, from national companies of Starbucks and Trader Joe's workers unionizing to little mom and pop efforts in their own regions. I'm not sure I got it right, but at that conference, I heard that 88% of Gen Zers are pro-union. That's remarkable. This is the time to get into supporting the worker, supporting workers of all types, including artists. One narrative shift in order for us to move forward and not replicate the harms of the past is that GIA members, nonprofit arts and culture organizations, for-profit entertainment industry and creative industries cannot continue to look and talk about artists, or look to artists and talk about artists in a way that makes it so that they are some sort of special interest group. We have for a long time basically said, well, let's fix the issue of healthcare access or housing just for artists. And yes, there are going to be examples where that is relevant and still necessary. But for those of you who are interested in the systemic level issues so that we all win across the country, this is probably the best time in my professional life that we are going to potentially advance the cause of fixing some of these problems, maybe moving towards single payer health, maybe towards paid leave, portable benefits that work for freelancers and not just for those who are trying to port their benefits from employer to employer. This is an unusual time, and it's great for us. The other thing that I want to point out that we need to shift is not just narrative, but practice. This is where dollars, energy, networks, information, research, all of the resources that we all sit on need to come together in a way where we are sharing and working collectively. Our approach with Unfettered is that we're going to work at system level issues by either creating or being at the table in cross-sector ways. All of us, in some way or another, have been put into a box. programmatically at foundations or even in my own mission. We're supposed to only look at the arts. But when those issues are systemic enough, right? Healthcare, guaranteed income, what you name it, when they are systemic enough, our strategy has to be broader to work across sectors and industries. And it's when we are divided that we lose. So I will just close by saying this is probably the best time ever that I can think of to actually humanize what it means to support artists.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear? I think you can hear and see me. I want to say a huge shout out and thank you to Sherilyn and to Eddie and the team at Grantmakers in the Arts. It's such a pleasure to be here to share with you today. A huge thank you to the tech team, to Jess and to Allie for getting us ready for today, and to Jessica and Angie, the previous two speakers, for setting a formidable task in front of me of following them. My name is Rychetta Watkins. I am the Director of Grantmaking and Partnerships for Memphis Music Initiative. It's in the name. And we support through two main strategies, direct run programs, and then I work with our grant making to support capacity building for community-based grassroots music programs that primarily engage Black and Brown youth. And today I'm sharing our work from the perspective, a couple of different perspectives. One, through the value of creative liberation, which is an organizational value for us here at MMI, and it is the way it shows up. The way that it shows up in our grant making is we're constantly thinking about how can we make it possible for the leaders that we support to be able to make a living doing the important work of preparing young people to continue Memphis's musical heritage. And because many of the people who are leaders of those organizations are themselves individual artists, these interests, their organizational interests and their interests as individual artists, very often intersect. And so for today, during my presentation, I'm going to focus on what we've learned as part of what we've learned not only from our grant making over the last 7 years as an organization, but also over the last 2.5 years through our engagement with a big strategic planning community process called More for Memphis. It's a Blue Meridian funded National Place Matters initiative, and MMI anchored the Arts and Culture Collaborative that was a part of that initiative. And so I want to focus today in particular on how we explored narrative shifting as one part of what had to happen along the way towards changing policy shifting here on the ground in Memphis. And so on the slide, here's some of the things that along the way we realized we were going to have to deal with. These are mindsets that were both internal to creatives, but also mindsets that were shaping the attitudes of institutional funders and some of the policymakers here on the ground. At the end of the day, the essential question was, how do we argue for both the economic and intrinsic value of arts and artists along the way to making more and better equitable policy for the creative economy here in Memphis? So as both Angie and Jessica mentioned, data is an issue in the arts for lots of reasons. It's not just more data that's like some of our institutional funders were saying. What we realized is we need better data. And so we realized that this was an opportunity to highlight some of the shortcomings that we have with some of the data, just for example, the arts and economic prosperity data. It is a great tool, but what many of us realize is that in some areas there is underreporting, especially by Black and Brown organizations, into that particular study, and so that can skew the data depending on where you are. Since data that comes out of the Census Bureau of Labor Statistics, the data, there are shortcomings in these various data sets, and for various reasons, as Angie mentioned, because folks are employed, because they're operating in the gig economy, things can be underreported, and that skews our understanding of the sector. And so we saw this as an opportunity to elevate those issues, but also as a way to pioneer collection and analysis of data in a way that would really center the experiences of and the voices of creatives. This was also, we realized, an opportunity because the arts are generally not at the table when it comes to these kinds of initiatives, these kind of big, broad-based urban planning, civic strategic planning processes. And so going into it, we had an agenda, and quite frankly, we stuck to it because there was pressure. Well, let's think about the arts and culture to help us understand belonging and identity and what it means to be a Memphian. And it's like, that's nice. And absolutely the arts can inform that, but we are also a sector of the economy and we need supports. We need concrete supports. And as a part of this, we want to be able to better understand where those gaps are so that we can call them out and call for specific policy interventions that serve us as a sector and not just the equivalent of sprinkling on a mural at the end or having a great band perform at the grand opening. So going into this process, the journey involved both research and data to help us better understand what was going on in the sector. And so the first thing that we did was we looked at the publicly available data and what does it tell us about the sector? As Angie mentioned, underreporting of labor is a huge issue when it comes to talking about the contributions of artists and individual creatives. This is also a place where storytelling comes into play because, as we all know, data can be intimidating for some creatives, but this is a place where we can take the data, the research, and we can really use the strength of our talents to tell a compelling story about how our work really is not being represented the way that the current tools are set up. And so what we realize is if this is the case, that because of so many artists are self-employed and how that leads to underreporting. And if you take that along with the arts being such a huge contributor to GDP here in Memphis, then that magnifies the issue of underreporting when it comes to thinking about the overall economic impact of the arts to GDP in Shelby County. We're essentially missing a third of the picture. Combine that with the fact that when we did a set of surveying, and about 85% of the people who responded to our survey self-identified racially, and about 45% of those people, so about 40-something% of the people who took the survey identified their race as African American. And so if that's the case, if we have such a large number of African Americans who are identifying as creatives, and that means they make up a large part of this workforce. So that means this is an equity issue. So if we're not getting the policy right around how we treat our individual artists in a city that is so important to the cultural heritage of not only our state, but also our nation, and I would say our world, then this is also an equity issue. We are missing out on an opportunity there as well. We also looked at the tax receipts relative to public funding. That blue bar there you see is the level of public funding on the county level. You see that on your left, and then on the right, you see on the state level. The green bar that you see are revenues. And so we can track it because the state then turns around and reimburses to the county. The state collects it, and they turn around and reimburse it to the county. So that's how we could track this. So you see the green bar there are the revenues. That's a huge gap. That indicates over 1,000% return on investment at both the county and state levels, vis-a-vis public investment of dollars up against tax collection. So everybody's making money on the arts, but how is that trickling down to support for artists and individual artists? The sector is absolutely punching above its weight. But again, when you think about the underreporting of the contributions of individual artists, add to that, most of this public funding goes to organizations. We did an analysis of Tennessee Arts Commission funding to Black and Brown, to arts organizations. And of the Black and Brown led organizations that we could identify, they constituted only about 27% of funding between 2018 and 2022. So between 2018 and 2022, only about 27% of the organizations who received Tennessee Arts Commission funding were Black and Brown led and Black and Brown serving organizations. So again, an equity issue, both at the level of individual artists and at the level of organizations. And when you consider that many of the arts nonprofits they really only employ one person. So essentially they're run by one person who very often is an artist. That still is an issue of equity for that individual artist. So this research essentially paints a picture for the conditions that exist in the creative economy here in Memphis. So what we also wanted to use this, the opportunity of participating in the More for Memphis project, we also wanted to use this as an opportunity to collect the voices of creatives, to fill in the outline, to fill in the contours, so that we could better understand through the lens, the experience, the lived experience of creatives, what it's like to navigate this environment. And so how did we do that? Honestly, this was the hardest part. How do you create a credible methodology that centers the voice of individual creatives without, as one of our consultants put it, cooking the books? We use the survey. People hate surveys. I know, I get it. But we try to innovate on the surveys in such a way that it would allow us to capture a broader range of voices. So we used a survey that featured open-ended questions. There's an example there on the slide. What barriers or obstacles make it difficult for you to make or sustain a living as a creative and contribute to the creative economy in Memphis? Another example is, what would a thriving and equitable arts community look like in Memphis? Again, we wanted to capture the authentic responses of folks who are actually living this out. We also oversampled for Black and Brown creatives because we wanted to center this experience. The goal of the project was to think about, identify specific interventions to increase economic mobility for the most affected. Here in Memphis, which is the largest metropolitan area with a majority Black population in the United States at 64%, the most affected, and it's also the third highest poverty rate in the United States of metropolitan areas. The most affected folks are Black folks, Black and brown folks. And so we wanted to make sure that we were centering their voices here.
Hi, Rychetta, sorry to interrupt. We do have to transition to our next presentation, but I think we can definitely continue this, what you're saying in the rest of your presentation during the Q&A, if that works for you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rafael Espinal, and first and foremost, I want to thank Grantmakers in the Arts for inviting me and allowing me to speak alongside all these other great panelists. My name is Rafael Espinal. I am the Executive Director of the Freelancers Union. We are a national organization representing over 500,000 independent workers across all different types of industries. And of course, the majority of those workers are consider themselves to be creatives and artists. Prior to becoming executive director, I am a former New York City Council member and New York State Assembly member. I was elected to office and served for over 10 years, representing neighborhoods in Brooklyn, New York City. And it's really where I would say I was able to build my understanding and my expertise around the needs of small businesses, independent workers, and especially communities that have been voiceless. I was able to work with the Freelancers Union back in 2015 to 2017 in crafting a law called the Freelancers and Free Act, which provides non-payment protections to the independent workforce. And we were the first city in the nation to pass such law, which we have been successful in getting passed in other parts of the country. I would say that a lot of my experience has been around bending and changing rules to work for the greater population, and which is why I brought that expertise, wanted to bring that expertise to the organization, because I think we all can agree that independent workers oftentimes are left out of the conversation when there are discussions being made about how to improve labor or how to improve small businesses. And now it's time we start bridging that gap to ensure everyone's represented. We have created this special partnership with the city of New York in which we were able to create a space called the Freelancers Hub, and it's a free co-working space. I think we all can agree that artists and independent workers in generally are always looking for free or affordable space for them to do their work or showcase their work. And working with the city, we built out a 5,000 square foot space in Brooklyn's Industry City with the mayor's office of media entertainment, focused towards creative workers in media and entertainment. And for $500,000 a year, we're able to provide over 50 desks, two days a week of programming and classes on various different topics, from learning how to write a contract, how to do your taxes, access to legal assistance, and even upskilling your current skills to allow you to be able to broaden your portfolio of your offerings. The space has been open since last October. We did have a former space in the city, but had to close it due to the pandemic. But we reopened, and we've had over 1,000 independent workers in all 5 boroughs come through our doors and use that space. These are the numbers that we have compiled working on various surveys over the years, and we found that over 60 million Americans do some sort of independent work, and that constitutes to about 40% of the U.S. workforce, and they contribute to $1.35 trillion to the U.S. economy, and around 77% of workers in the arts and design industries are freelance workers. I think we all can agree, we need artists, and this is why. The arts and cultural sector is an economic engine that directly employs more than 5 million workers and contributes over close to $1 trillion to the nation's gross domestic product. But we have to make sure that we are investing in this creative economy, and that means providing relief for self-employed artists and boosting arts roles in community development. The creative workforce is an investment in our nation's economic vitality, problem-solving abilities, community well-being, and lifelong learning. And we must also consider the arts sector in policies on worker protections, equitable compensation, paid leave, early childhood education, and more. And this is why we must continue working. This is why we do the work. Freelancers Union tries to bridge that gap, tries to connect independent workers so we can create a unified voice and be able to uplift the challenges and get policymakers to make the changes they need to ensure that these workers are able to live a life with dignity in our country. Client non-payment, we found 75% of freelancers experience this at least once a year. And of course, if you are an artist or a creative, this includes you. If you are working with a contract, I'm sure there are many folks who have experienced not getting paid on time or not getting paid at all for projects that they've been commissioned to deliver, which is why we take this issue very seriously and made it our number one priority over the years. And we found that freelancers who are stiff lose on average about $6,000 each year, which we all can agree is money that can be used to pay for rent, utilities, and deal with the rising costs of inflation and the cost of living in cities like New York and LA and Seattle. Only about a quarter of freelancers say that they always use a contract, and what that does is it makes them extremely vulnerable to non-payment and to other issues that exploits them. This is a funny slide that I like to use. Some of the biggest scam artists that have been notoriously featured on Netflix and other forms of media. This is the number one excuse people get, and it's that the check is in the mail, and oftentimes they're left waiting for months or even not be able to get paid at all. The Freelancers and Free Act, which is the law I've been explaining, what it does is it creates multi-tiers to ensure that freelancers are paid or freelancers at least have some sort of resource that they have to go to small claims court and fight their claim. One, it creates a basic standard. There's a 30-day net pay in every single contract. So by law, your client has to pay you within 30 days. A contract is mandatory between a client and a freelancer, especially if that work is for $800 or more. There are anti-retaliation clauses. So if a client decides not to work with a freelancer or with a creative or an artist for not wanting to sign a contract, that freelancer can place a claim with the city of New York or with the city they're in where this law exists, and the city is able to find that client. And the city helps you find legal assistance in case you have to go to small claims court and fight your case. And when you go to small claims court, the city often provides you with a letter of support, claiming that they've themselves investigated the claim and that you have a case against this client. And when you are able to go to small claims court, and if you win, then that client is liable for double damages and for your attorney fees. As I mentioned, we've been doing this work since 2015 when I was in the New York City Council, and as I transitioned to become executive director of the Freelancers Union, we have been able to expand it to other cities across the country. Just in July of this year, the city of LA instituted the Freelancers and Free Act there, meaning freelancers in the city of Los Angeles performing work in the city have these protections. In Seattle, it went into effect as of last year. The state of Illinois became the first state in the nation to sign such legislation just 2 weeks ago. So Chicago and the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois will have this protection in place by early next year. The city of Minneapolis and the city of Columbus, Ohio, and the list will continue to grow. We're also talking to legislators in Austin, Texas, in Miami, Florida, and the hope is that one day we can take this national, as long as we're able to make this, as long as we're able to prove that this works in multiple cities and states across the country. We're also working to expand paid leave benefits to the independent workforce. Currently, we are working with a Better Balance, a national organization that's working on many different states and cities to ensure that paid leave is available. You know, there are no sick days when you decide to work independently, and taking a mental health day can cost you your mental health. Paid leave and medical leave can include medical leave, parental leave, caregiving leave. So it's really about making sure that independent workers have access to these benefits that folks in traditional workplace have. Again, 10 states as of today have passed paid leave and medical leave laws for freelancers. This is the list of states that have such a program. But we continue to find that even though we have about 10 states that have this law in place, there are many differences in how they're implemented. So we continue to work with the Better Balance to ensure that there is parity across the board. And of course, the hope is that we can take this on a federal level as well and create a federal system. So, you know, we are really on the ground ensuring that independent workers and artists have, one, access to resources and access to education information, but we also are doing the advocacy work. You know, we are going city to city, state to state, and even Washington, D.C. to expand the protections we just mentioned. I think Angie and the other speakers mentioned about how there are many benefits that exist and how we how conversations are heavily focused on boxing independent workers and traditional employees and I guess creating silos on what you are as work. But we have to start focusing on how do we represent and create a system that benefits all workers to ensure that all folks living in our country have access to the benefits they need to live a life with dignity in our country. So thank you. And that is our work at the Freelancers Union.
All right. We are. Thank you so very much. All of your presentations are fantastic. Clearly we need more time. I feel like I say this every time we have a webinar, but there will be time during the Q&A for you all to expand a little bit more on your presentations if there's anything else you want to add. But before that, we want to take some time for you all to reflect and to process the information that you've taken in today. And we are going to do that via what's called a Mentimeter. You may or may not have heard of it, but we're going to drop the instructions into the chat. Essentially, you'll be sharing words that respond to a broader question, and those words will grow or shrink just depending on how many people may have the same word as you do. Okay, so that was just kind of a little bit technical there, but the question that I first want to just have you all sit with, as you can see on the screen, what word best describes how you are processing the presentation? Okay, you can consider 1, 2, or 3 words, and the way that you will submit your response for us all to be able to see it on the screen. Oh, beautiful. Some of you have like gotten right to it. But you can see the instructions in the chat. You go to menti.com, type in the code 69845537, and then input your answers into the website. So we're seeing all of this populate in real time, which is pretty exciting. Social protection, yes, that came up quite a few times. Overwhelm, and that word is growing, so that's an indication there that this is some big work. Solidarity, that's right. We've got a community of practice here, and I think we can all tap into that as we try to make the sector better for artists. Inspire, that's great. Yes, we've got some great speakers who you can tap into afterwards for more guidance. Short versus long game. Keep them coming. I'll call them out. Bogged down, frustration, overdue, big picture. Organizing, excitement, eagerly, complicated. Workers' rights, absolutely. This is great. All right, so take a quick pause and just take a second to, if you haven't already, look at how things are panning out for the folks who are here. The biggest words that we've got are inspired, solidarity, capitalism is growing, solidarity, inspired, capitalism, equity, overwhelm, and hopeful. So know that you are in company of others who are trying to do this work, and we can continue to work together to advance the sector, ask questions, knowing that it can be a little bit overwhelming. Things, unfortunately, we haven't seen as much change in the space of artists as workers. And like Angie said earlier, seeing artists as like a special subset group outside of all other people who work, and like that's just not necessarily what we want to be thinking. Like Angie and others said, of course there are spaces where that makes sense, but generally speaking, that's not the case, and we want to kind of shift the narrative, like Rychetta was saying, around that. And so we're going to take a pause on this question, and our tech team is going to kind of like wipe the board, and we are going to take a minute to think about the second question. What are some of your needs as you think about next steps? And again, you can drop in a word or, a few, 2 words that might respond to that. Union. That's great. More information. General operating funds, GOS, absolutely, that comes up a lot. Collaborators, time, yes. Coordination, coalition building, public funding, absolutely, keep them coming, everyone. Collaborators, more information, it's growing. Collaboration, collaborators. Contract models, coalition building, again. Alliances, policy decisions, legal templates, issues, knowledge. Keep them coming. Partners, alliances. A lot of these words are talking about the connection that we're building with our colleagues, with our coworkers, other people in the sector. So I hope that everyone, all 96 of us who are on this webinar right now, are noticing that we need to create more space to connect with each other. And I'll say this again toward the end of the webinar, but the emails of our presenters will be shared out and on screen, so you'll be able to reach out to them directly. Space for discussion, information, yes, and we've got some links that were shared in the chat. We'll also share those and follow up with you as well. Great. All right, yeah, so we've cooperatives, coordination, more info, advocacy, collective bargaining, partnerships, research, alliances. So much of this is like, to me, like hooking arm in arm and like just kind of building together in solidarity. So thank you all. Absolutely. Thank you all for participating in this.
While we wait for Charlene to rejoin us, if you could just think of some questions that you're interested in asking our panelists and have those prepared, you can use the Q&A function that you see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also drop those into the chat. We would love to hear from you, and Charlene will be back momentarily. Thank you all so much.
This is Angie. I neglected to mention, we do have a new, not necessarily a research report, but I'll drop a link in. We had co-hosted a convening with Urban Institute recently that brought together worker organizer groups across different sectors, domestic workers, farm workers, self-employed, disabled workers, sex workers, etc. And this is as a synthesis about some of the issues that we're seeing and some of the opportunities, and they can also serve as a little bit of a blueprint for folks thinking about how to get involved on some of these issues. So I'll put them in the chat.
That's great. Thank you for that, Angie. Sorry, I dropped out. I don't know, that's weird, but reach out if you would like to continue further discussion so that GIA can coordinate something like that. So anyway, we're at our Q&A. I see that Angie has begun responding. some of our questions, and I've kind of put them all together. So I'll start with our kind of going most recent to furthest back. So for all of our panelists, what factors are included in the calculations on the economic impact of artist workers? For example, dollar contribution to local or national economy. Is it based on the fees paid to art workers, economic growth of local businesses adjacent to artist programming, etc.? Can you speak to that? And everyone who's attending, feel free to drop more questions in the Q&A if you have them.
So for us, it's from the census, a combination of the census data and also the kind of regularly reported economic data that is for the arts sector. But one of the things, and that calls out, generally it's performing arts, theaters, musicians, dancers, generally around the performing arts. But one of the issues is that doesn't attend to the contours of place. So here in Memphis, that doesn't account, let's say, for example, here in Memphis, the creative economy would absolutely take into account tourism and some of our cultural heritage and historic sites. But when it comes to tourism, that's not necessarily always counted in when it comes to the arts economy. And so we chose to use the term creative economy when it came to thinking about our project. And one of the things, our project is ongoing, it's absolutely ongoing. And one of the things that we are working on is how do we here for Memphis create a dashboard that encompasses all of that to give a better view of the economic impact here on the ground in Memphis.
Besides Rychetta's work, which is really phenomenal in terms of capturing, particularly through an equity lens, I love how you overweighted certain populations, because I just think that's fair. So the other sort of examples, if people are looking for them, is models of how people or how different regions work with like local economic development authorities, et cetera, for data collection and what data sets they use if you're thinking regionally. I think about the Michigan reports on their creative economy. I think about Otis College, their years-long efforts started by Sammy Hoy when he was president there on the creative economy. So there are models and practices. Nationally, I go to, I think many of us do, Sunil at National Endowment for the Arts, just our uber wonk in the most loving ways. The one thing I want to point out about focusing on data is that it can help and it can harm. So I think knowing who the population is, knowing where they are, what they need, we need that data absolutely the way that Rychetta, which I just got to call out, like when I was listening to Rychetta, it was like I was in church because of that backdrop. But yes, I absolutely agree. We need that kind of data, especially for all of us to look for data for those who have been invisible, right? Not by design by the artist, but by design by our systems. The other thing about data, just to be cautious about though, is it can be used to hurt our sector. Data gets used in economic development and through urban planning as a way to target and figure out where might real estate values skyrocket. Where can we use the arts and thriving cultural communities as a place for, potential displacement for people with higher incomes. So I just want to be really cautious that when we play the game of a la Richard Florida economic development data, we're not handing things over in a way that creates greater instability for our communities. And so when we look for that data, to also think about who owns that data, who has access to that data, and some of the things that are really prominent in social science circles around debates around who controls data.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Angie. And that's what I didn't get to in my enthusiasm. And Sherilyn knows I, could talk about this, all day. And so what I didn't get to was, again, we wanted to center creatives at the heart of this and make sure that creatives had, the creatives here in Memphis were the ones driving these narratives instead of the narratives being used to excuse the policy void around them and their experiences. And so at the end of the day, that's exactly the way we thought about it. How do we create a body of information, knowledge, and understanding that would equip creatives in the creative community here to be at the table from the very beginning, to be a part of those conversations and be able to drive access to what they need to develop themselves as thriving members of the creative economy here in Memphis, and to be at the part of economic development and community development projects from the very beginning. Again, not at the end, putting a mural up on that wall or being a performer at the grand opening, but being a vital part of what does it mean. And if you center those voices and concerns at the beginning, then we will create better communities, because the things that we care about are the things that make vibrant, thriving communities happen.
Great. While you're here, Rychetta, I just want to make sure that I ask you, because we received a question in the Q&A. Are you able to share the survey methodology and results post the webinar, because some folks are interested? I think that question came from Ted Russell, but I know other people would be interested as well.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. I can absolutely share that afterwards. We don't have it written up into a white paper, but we can absolutely, we do have a presentation on our methodology and results, so we can absolutely share that.
All right, sounds great. Thank you so much. All right, so another question came in for everybody. How, if at all, are you considering the labor of critics in considering who counts as artist workers or arts workers? The reaction.
We count them. I know, Rafael, you would count them at their members. Yeah, I mean, I don't see why they would be divided.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. So we've got another question that came in. And the person, actually, I'm going to do this other one. So this actually came in while you were presenting, Rafael, but I think all can kind of share. So the person asks, can you expand on why 1930s WPA solutions won't work in today's world?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the social safety net that was created at that time was targeted towards the traditional workforce. It did not include independent workers, independent work. So what it created was a system that depends on a worker and a employer relationship in order for you to receive the benefits you need. Unemployment insurance, for example, Social Security. There's a lot of these benefits you get to pay into that they have employers pay into as well. So we're at a time where I think it's fair to say that we're seeing a lot more people turning to independent work. I think the pandemic itself as well created a situation in which people wanted to leave that 9-to-5 traditional employee workspace to work for themselves. But what we're seeing is that now we have more people who lack a social safety net that they need in order to care for themselves and their families. Paid leave is one of those programs I mentioned. During the pandemic, when there were government mandated shutdowns, lots of people were left at home without any access to income. And the unemployment insurance program, unfortunately, did not account for them. So us as an organization had to advocate on a federal level to push for the CARES Act to include independent workers in a system that was created in the 30s for the first time in our nation's history. And we saw it through the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which worked. Unfortunately, those programs expired because we're now living in this post-pandemic time. But I think it really opened up the door for us to have a real conversation of how do we reshape our current benefit system to include all workers so that no one falls through the cracks in the case of in a future economic downturn, whether it be nationally or personally.
Great. Thank you, Rafael. All right. So, Jess, I'm going to kick it over to you. At the end of your presentation, don't worry. At the end of your presentation, you named a few different recommendations. Reducing misclassification of employees as independent contractors, extending social insurance, worker protections. There were a few. There were about 3 or 4. And I'm wondering if there's any one in particular that you think folks can. I mean, all are of course like valuable. Yes, I know. But one in particular that you think folks can kind of zero in on to start, or I mean, Jess and Angie, if you want to both respond, if you're like, no, all are equal, do all, that's also okay. But just wanted to check in for folks who are also kind of new, like, where do I start? Overwhelm was like one of the bigger words. So wanted to give space for that.
Yeah, I mean, I will respectfully take my option to not directly answer that question.
That's fine.
I do think like these are policy areas, and then I will obliquely answer the question. These are policy areas that have in the past been very separate. There are the people who have been working on paid leave for 30 years and they're into that. There are the people who work on like disability benefits and they're into that. And it's very rare to have a table where those groups talk to each other about how these benefits can relate to each other and how they serve different aspects of the population. And so I think that's where CCI's work is really unique and also filling a vital place in this conversation. So I'll hand it off to Angie because I think they are also interrelated, and often there aren't policy tables where that where there's an opportunity to see them as interrelated. There you go, Angie.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a great question. I think there's 2 ways to think about this. If you are a GIA member, you're thinking about the people that you're serving and what you already know. And if, for instance, if in your own backyard, in your community, the displacement of cultural communities of color is a big threat, then maybe, you know, for you, low-hanging fruit is getting really involved in development, housing, planning, all of those kinds of issues with your own local community. That's not to say, though, that the expertise that you develop should stay local. I think this is the time to act communally and collectively and bring that knowledge to bear at GIA conferences, et cetera, to describe some of the practice, because we are all experimenting with what it looks like to fix things and not just kind of like adjust like the rules here and there to kind of create like one housing development and suddenly it's like we're done. Like that's just not sustainable, clearly. The other way to look at the question or answer the question is, one of the rules that I'm just going to say, this is my desire, we haven't implemented it yet, is that we can help everyone who's basically wondering, what are the low-hanging fruit opportunities? What are ready to go opportunities where, whether it's the state of Washington that might sort of domino effect across the country, or at the federal level, like right now, paid leave isn't going to go anywhere. Or sorry, not paid leave. Paid leave could go somewhere. Sorry. Portable benefits isn't going to go anywhere quite yet politically. But when the forces align, we would be the ones that you could look to be like, yes, this is the right moment to strike and collectivize and put your signatures on things like portable benefits issue, or to Jessica's example of like, we have in this country, as an example, laws that deliberately, intentionally make people second-class citizens still, including disabled people on SSI, Social Security, disability. You cannot get over a certain income. And this is something that GIA has also been pushing on. No one has been in solidarity with the disability community. When I go meet with Care Chicago or wherever, they're like, who are you? Why are you talking to us? This is amazing, because no one's ever knocked on our door unless you are already of the disability community. And I say, we have a lot of dancers in our community. We have a lot of people who are disabled in our community. So I do care. How can we show up? I say all that to say that there will be moments politically when Everyone needs each other, including the arts. And that's the time to basically be open, receptive, and ready within your own institutions to say, yes, we can sign on to this. And I'm going to point to one of the biggest missed opportunities is we had the opportunity to provide, to do single payer health. And guess what? History has shown only those in the nonprofit healthcare industry cared about it. No other sector signed on. That's a shame. We can't keep letting that happen.
Thank you for that, Angie. Yes, Rychetta, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in really quickly on that, Sherilyn. This is also one of the places I think where local policy interventions can come into play. And again, that was part of what we are pursuing. We used our surveying, the responses to those open-ended questions. We did keyword analysis, and then we clustered those keywords to identify themes, and then use those themes to identify what are some areas where we can have specific policy interventions, for folks on the ground here in Memphis. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to lift it up our methodology is that we can actually, by collecting together the voices of creatives, we can do that mixed method analysis to actually see through their experiences, through the challenges that they're faces in their lived experiences as creatives, opportunities for specific policy and interventions. So one of our partners here in Memphis, the Music Export Memphis, they are championing a Fair Pay Partners campaign, calling out basically, here's a set of policies. I think Rafael alluded to something similar in his presentation. For if you're going to be working with musicians here in Memphis, here is a set of policies that you need to be following: how you pay them, how you treat them, the kind of spaces that you have to provide for them when they come to perform, and then going to elicit others here in other partners here in Memphis to sign on to that as a way to galvanize support towards a local ordinance around this. So change is possible on both ends, from the top down nationally, but also bottom up locally. So I also just wanted to call out, there is a place here for local policy and legal law, changing local policies and law as well. And using the voices of our creatives to help drive that.
All right. Thank you, Rychetta. So we are at time, 2 minutes over, but I do have to ask, please, 30 seconds each, super, super quick, 30 seconds each, round robin, call to action if you have it before we go. Your mic drop moment is right now. I'm going to call you out just because it's super, super quick, the way that you are on my screen. So Angie, you're up.
Keep showing up to these opportunities that GIA and others within the field are presenting for getting involved on structural change.
Amazing. Thank you, Angie. Jessica.
There was a question about decoupling the conversation about social supports from work, and I think that's why the work at CCI is dropping the liberated work moniker, because they're interested in that. So I just want to address that. And then we need more funders who see this as a critical issue for our field, and who can make the case internally to their board and their leadership that this is a really important investment, and it's not necessarily about making art, but it makes art possible by making artists possible. So I just have a last minute plea for more funders in this space. Please, please, please be brave.
Thank you, Jess. Rychetta.
Pay artists and model that value for others. 2, don't be afraid of advocacy. Support space for creatives to organize, to educate themselves, to network so that they can press for the changes that they need to see on the ground locally, and and for them to participate in state level and national level action. And then third, listen to and trust artists about what they need and what they need to survive, not only survive, but thrive.
Great. Thanks, Rychetta. All right, Rafael, bring us home.
We are currently advocating as an organization for the most, I think, fundamental basic right, and that's the right to get paid after completing work. So I encourage everyone to come to the Freelancers Union, reach out to us if you want to get involved in our advocacy work. We currently got the law passed in the first state of the nation in Chicago. It's currently sitting in the desk on the governor's desk of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul. She vetoed this bill last year. She could have made New York State the first state in the country to have this bill in place, but now we're going to be the second. So we need all of your support to get her to sign this bill and really help us create this national movement and to push Washington, D.C. to create pay parity across the board to ensure that all independent workers or all workers have access to protections to ensure they get paid for work they completed.
All right. Thank you all so much for your incredible presentations. As you can see on the screen, we've got the contact information of our presenters. We'll be sending out a PDF of the slides. We'll be sending out a recording of the deck. And we just so appreciate our presenters being here, for you all being here. There is a survey in the chat. We'll drop it in the chat so it's fresh for you. We would like for you to let us know what you thought of the webinar. Okay, so we know how to move in the future. And thank you again for joining us. Have an excellent day, everyone. Bye.